I'm Ryan Peck,
And I'm Nicole Barlow.
and this is Soundtrack Your Life, where we speak with the guests about a soundtrack that is important to them. Returning to the podcast today is DT from the Space Castle YouTube channel. Welcome back, DT.
Thanks, man. Super psyched to be here. Thanks for having me once again.
So, we had you a few months ago to talk about Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Mhm.
Today, we're going to go to another movie that is only a year older than that.
Yeah, right? It's weird when you think about it like that.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, but since we talked about Scott Pilgrim in our last meeting, I forgot to tell a story that I heard regarding my Arrested Development, and obviously Michael Cera is the star of is one of the stars of Arrested Development, and so we're going to be talking about my mid-20s later when we talk about this movie. So this kind of ties it together. So when I was working at the Apple store after college, I met this girl, and her name, I'll slightly change this. Her name was Jenny Holt. So whenever I would walk by her, I would say Jenny Holt, and I would raise my hands in the air like they do on the show.
Right, Steve Holt.
And then one day she goes, "Hey, not that it bothers me, but why do you do that every time you see me? Why do you say my name, my full name, and raise your arms in the air?" And I said, "Oh, it's from Arrested Development." And I was like, "I know it's stupid, but there's a guy named Steve Holt, and whenever he enters a room, he does that, and he says Steve Holt." And I was like, "I know it's stupid." And she goes, "Oh, that's funny." And I was like, "Okay." And I just assumed that like that was gonna be the end of the conversation.
Right.
Like, "Oh, okay, it's from TV, stupid, bye." And she goes, "My brother's name is Steve Holt."
That's
and I go,
fantastic.
"Oh, awesome." And she goes, "Oh,
Oh,
I'm
that
going to
rules.
tell him about that." And I go, "Oh, okay." And so the next time I see her, she goes, "Hey, I called my brother, and he tells me that all his friends do that to him too."
Yeah, of course they do. Totally. Oh, that's wonderful.
But that's not it. And she goes, "Not only is my brother's name Steve Holt, my dad's name is also Steve Holt. And my grandfather's name is also Steve Holt."
What?
So in her family, they've been passing the name Steve Holt down to the boys, or at least to the firstborn, I guess. I don't know if it's a
Yeah,
George
I
Foreman
love
thing
it.
where there's like 7 Georges, but
Yeah, there's like George and Georgette and Georgina and little G and big G and yeah.
so I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that's awesome and kind of weird."
Yeah. That's
And-
rad though. That's
and
fantastic.
then the next time I see her, she goes, "Hey, I didn't know that Ron Howard was part of Arrested Development. I finally like watched it." I'm like, "Oh yeah," like he's like the narrator and he's a producer. And she goes, "My dad went to high school with Ron Howard."
Holy shit. So
How is she just not aware of Arrested Development before this
I don't
point?
know.
Steve Holt. Wow.
Yeah, and she goes, in that first episode, George Michael loses. He wants to be in that play with Maybe because he wants to kiss her, right? And he
Yeah,
goes, "My dad beat Ron Howard out for a part in that same play."
No way.
This is insane.
And she's like, and she even goes further and says, "If you saw a picture of my dad in high school, he would wear his Letterman jacket and he had that same sort of haircut."
The real life Steve Holt. What a fantastic anecdote.
That's
I love
awesome.
that OC related Arrested Development lore. It's great.
Yeah.
And since we talked about Michael Cera in the Scott Pilgrim episode and you're coming back, I was like, "Oh, I really need to tell you that story."
I love it, dude. It was worth waiting for.
But without further ado, today we are going to talk about the 2009 Mark Webb film 500 Days of Summer. So DT, why are we talking about 500 Days of Summer?
Let's do that, Ryan. I love this movie. This is a movie that I initially went into just by pure coincidence, having gone through the worst breakup of my life at that time. The first time I was ever really, really in love and really, really got my heart broken. And the first time I saw the movie, of course, I related to Tom, as played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And it became like one of those comfort food movies where I would watch it almost like, you know, Dirty Dancing or something, with like a pint of ice cream and sit on the couch and cry to myself and whatnot. And it wasn't until I started getting to, the back end of processing that breakup and getting my shit back together that I realized that, like, this is not that movie at all. This is a movie about Tom kind of being an asshole and kind of projecting all these fantasies onto somebody who did not need to be that person to have all those fantasies projected onto, and didn't get his heart broken. He broke his own heart, and he was kind of the own villain of his own story without realizing it. And that actually kind of made me turn around and look at my own situation, very much feeling like I had gotten broken up with and I was the victim and I was just a sad sack, feeling bad about myself. And it made me go back and look through the relationship. It was like a 2-year relationship, and just kind of reevaluate myself and who I was during that relationship, and where I could have done things better. And I could have grown and have grown since then, and grew at the time as well. And realizing that, relationships aren't like a good guy and a bad guy. It's just circumstance. It's life, and things happen. And you view it all through rose-tinted glasses, whether it's the love and the romance of the initial relationship, or playing yourself as the victim and trying to make yourself feel better about the fact that you broke up with somebody. And neither of those are accurate. They're not reality. And sometimes you got to take a step back and realize what is actually reality. And this movie, in a weird way, helped me get through the breakup initially, and then also maybe turn around and realize that, yeah, like, that's what relationships are. Like, it's not all like a good guy and a bad guy and somebody getting broken up with and somebody moving on immediately and being happy. It's a whole strange, messy thing. And yeah, I love this movie. It's wonderfully written. It's wonderfully acted. The soundtrack is wonderful, and we'll speak about that at length. But it was a very important movie for one of the most formative and important times of my life, wherein I really sort of started to grow into the man I hopefully believe myself to be now today. But yeah, it's really important to me.
I have to say, DT, that's very emotionally mature of you to see this movie in that light, because I feel like a lot of the discussion around 500 Days of Summer is now about, actually, Summer isn't the villain so much. It's
Exactly.
more about Tom's illusions and projections and expectations. But you kind of have to wonder if that was the screenwriter's original intention, because this is, in fact, a revenge film, in essence, that the screenwriter wrote
Kind of.
about a specific relationship that he had been in. And it's so pointed that the screenwriter has admitted it's 75%, which is probably being generous, right? 75% his true life experience with a woman that he met. And the movie opens with a quote unquote hate note to a woman named Jenny Beckham. And the hate note reads, "Author's note, the following is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to persons living or dead is purely coincidental, especially you, Jenny Beckham, bitch."
Yeah.
So in 2009, I feel like everybody related to Tom. And you know what? There's an argument for that. And I think we flash forward to now, and there's a much more balanced view of what happens in this film between these two characters.
Though I do I did notice. Well, maybe I should start with my relationship to this movie.
It's the brink of Valentine's Day. Like, let's just
let's
get it
start
all out.
there, and then I'm gonna do my spiel about the narrator at the beginning. So I watched this in the theaters when it came out. I was pretty excited about it. At this time, I was a big fan of Joseph Gordon-Levitt as an actor. I don't think I was tired of Zooey Deschanel as an actor yet.
Yeah.
I was excited that Mark Webb was doing a movie. He's a music video director. In the aughts, I was very into, my favorite music video directors moving into cinema. Your Spike Jonze and Michelle Gondry and your Jonathan Glazers. And, so I was pretty excited about the film, and, got good reviews. And it it kind of wrecked me kind of in a similar way as you, DT. I wasn't like in the tail end or in the midst of a breakup, but you know, it reminded me of a time where I got my heart badly broken, and you know, I related a little too much to Tom, and I didn't want to have to, you know, reopen those wounds in a movie that I thought was going to be kind of a feel good sort of, you know, rom com. I was like, oh crap, like, oh, you got
Yeah.
invited to the party and he's got these expectations, and it's gonna totally wreck him because that's not it, you know, he's not gonna get back together with her, and it's gonna destroy him. And I've been there, and so
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy the movie because it reminded me too much of myself. Right? I was like, oh, I was that Tom guy at one point. And so I didn't like it because of that, and also because of like the like punchline at the end. It didn't land for me, and I was like, fuck this movie.
Yeah, the autumn thing. That's why, like Nicole, you said that a read of the movie at the time could have been that the writer wasn't aware that he was making something as ironic and pointed as he thought he was, or that he was intending to make a different sort of movie that what it ended up being. And the autumn thing sticks with me to the contrary, because you see Tom go through this relationship where he's projecting all these fantastical feelings, and you know, this sort of like, oh, you're the love of my life, you're my soulmate, you're making me complete. And she tells him from the beginning, like, I just want to keep this casual, dude. Like, you're cute, we're having a good time, it's awesome. Let's not mess this up. He keeps pushing the issue. She relents. They get into an actual relationship. They put a label on it. They end up breaking up and so forth. But he goes through this terrible breakup that he's largely put on himself. He's broken his own heart because he idealized this woman, and he has to process those feelings. And we start to get this sense that he's putting his life back together. He's putting the pieces back together. And maybe he's learning a lesson that we as the audience have learned up to this point, both potentially with him, but also like maybe for him. And even the narrator is kind of like, yeah, Tom has realized such and such, like fate doesn't exist. It's not destiny, blah, blah, blah. And then he turns back around and he goes and talks to her, Minka Kelly. I forget that. Yeah, Minka Kelly's the actress's name. And yeah, he introduces himself because they're up for the same job, and they have like a meet cute at the lobby where they're both sort of there to interview for the same job. And she introduces herself as Summer, which is ironic because he's just gotten over or Autumn, and he's just gotten over Summer. And he like almost literally winks at the camera, and you're like, this dude is just a head case and has not learned a lesson
Right.
at all. He's going to go through the exact same motions where he's going to paint this idealized version of this woman he just met in his head. He's going to go through the whole like, she's completing me, she's my soulmate, all the relationship like songs and movies I watched and listened to growing up as a kid that tainted his perception of what love and relationships are. He's not learned from any of this. He's going to go through the exact same cycle all over again. And it's that point that convinces me that whether or not the screenwriters intended to tell that story from the start, there's a little bit of self-awareness where I think they realized that they as they were maybe writing the script, they were realizing they were writing a different sort of story.
He eternal sunshines himself.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like that ending, I think for a lot of people sort of undoes anything that you assume that he may have learned from, or you know, any self-reflection that he may have gained from what he looked back on with his relationship with Summer, and kind of reconsidering that maybe things weren't as rosy as he thought. And it's tough. Like, it's a tough one to swallow because, one, it's sort of peak twee, right? And I think you could get away with
Yeah.
that in 2009, and watching it back, it does become it's a little cringe, you know, it's a choice. But I think there's really a strong argument to make here that there was really some intention to make Summer the villain and to make Tom somebody who had been hurt. And I think you can make an argument for it. I think she does some things in this movie that are questionable.
Sure.
In some interviews with the music supervisor, Andrea von Forster, I'm not sure how to say her name, the original karaoke song that she tried to get for the bar scene where they're both doing karaoke, and Zooey Deschanel does this cover of Sugar Town. JGL does a very drunk performance of Here Comes Your Man by Pixies. The original song they wanted for her was These Boots Are Made for Walking by Nancy Sinatra.
Oh, that's
Which
very
is
on the
so on the
nose.
nose, right? And knowing that that's the song that they originally wanted, knowing that they had talked about, the Kings of Convenience song, Toxic Girl, which is also, like, right on the
Yeah.
nose, you gotta wonder.
Also, who does that at karaoke?
Right. Totally, no
Yeah.
one. And then there's a lot of stuff in this movie, like, my notes for this are crazy because it's just me, like, taking tallies of how many times somebody says skank.
Yeah. The male characters in this movie are a little bit chauvinistic and a little bit misogynistic. You know, you got the one character who's played by Jeffrey Arend, who is obviously not having much luck with ladies and is very much decided to blame the ladies. By today's standards, he kind of comes off as a bit of an incel. It's a
Right.
little awkward and
Right, we would,
uncomfortable.
probably
Yeah,
qualify that as an insult. But yeah, it's a lot of like, "Oh, well, she must be a lesbian if she doesn't wanna date,"
right.
Right.
which is kind of funny to rewatch and be like, "Oh, is that what we were thinking about people in 2009? Like, you're a strong, independent woman, you must be a big leso?"
I do remember
Right.
in 2009 thinking that this movie is pretty progressive.
Right.
It's like, oh, we're breaking the rom-com formula
Right.
and we're making something more real. Too real for me right now, but pretty real.
Yeah, right.
To be
Yeah.
honest, like, my biggest cringe with this movie is not 'cause, obviously I'm not Tom, but I think I am aspects of both of them in that I also probably had, like, a terrible misreading of sad British rock that too but it influenced my life in, like,
Sure.
some very, dangerous ways. I've also started
Yeah.
conversations and relationships on the basis of the Smiths that probably didn't need to be started.
Yes.
Sure.
Don't start there.
And same thing to be said for movies too. I mean, the movie makes a point of referencing The Graduate as being a movie that so many people have misread as being like this romantic comedy. And you get to the end of the movie, and after they break out of the wedding and they've effectively destroyed the girl's life, and they're sitting on the back of the bus, they have that moment where all of a sudden that excitement and that rush and that adrenaline and all those emotions are gone, and they're like, shit, we got nothing. We have nothing to build on at this point. Like, we are two people who have no connection, and we just blew all this shit up, and they are just sort of
Right.
lost. And people, even back then when the movie first came out, like Mike Nichols was an amazing writer and director. And people misread that movie because it's very subtle in the fact that The Graduate was not a love story. It was not a romantic story. It was about capricious youth and being dumb and compulsive and not knowing how to process emotions and thinking you're feeling one thing when in fact, like, your brain is just playing tricks on you. And that's very much what this movie is too. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say whether or not the writers and Mark Webb himself were self-aware to that degree when they made this movie, because it's very self-contradicting.
Perhaps Mark Webb was more aware than the writer.
I would guess so. Yeah, I would guess so.
Because in the beginning with the narrator, when he describes Summer, he talks about her parents divorced, and because of that, she can break things off without feeling anything. And I feel like that's a shitty thing to say about someone who has divorced parents. Like, oh, because of that, like, they feel nothing when they break up with someone. Like, I don't know. So I feel like they were trying to paint her as much more negative than she ended up becoming in the movie.
It's an interesting way to frame that, right? That, like, just because she's never been in love or never had a relationship, where she felt mutually about someone that, yeah, again, they're making these, like, kind of broad assumptions about, like, well, she must be a super skank who can't feel. She must be somehow
Right.
damaged or broken, but then, you also in the narration hear how she's got this, like, manic pixie dream girl, like, Belle and Sebastian quote in her high school photo, and, like, for all intents and purposes, she's, like, the perfect projection of what somebody like Tom would want. If he could, like, weird science girlfriend in the lab, this is who he would, like, weird science in the lab.
Yeah, like a personification of like Belle and Sebastian and the Smiths and, you know, British prog rock and romantic movies and stuff. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And I'm so glad that we've gotten away from the manic pixie dream girl as like a movie and TV trope. It was so terrible and so unintentionally toxic, and I'm glad it's just gone forever at this point.
Well, you
So
hope it's
yeah,
gone forever.
I can't remember the last time I've seen it, which is a relief. But yeah, It is interesting though that like Summer is the one who has the real arc in this movie. Like everything is seen through Tom's lens, but Summer is the one who kind of gets over her maybe phobias or walls that she's put up regarding like relationships and falling in love and love at first sight and meeting somebody. And she's the one that actually has the change and grows up a little bit and meets somebody and really sort of experiences all the things that Tom thinks that he's experiencing. And she experiences them for real. She gets engaged. She falls in love. She gets married. She presumably lives happily ever after, whereas Tom is just locked in the same cycle, possibly
You're
indefinitely.
so right.
So,
I think that's what's so frustrating about this rewatch is that I realized that actually there are some things about her character and how it's drawn around the fringes that are really interesting and that you
mhm.
want to know more about this kind of rich inner life that she seems to have. You want to know more about why somewhere within this 500 days span she decided to meet a guy while she was reading Dorian Gray. What happened there? I don't know, but I want to know. And you obviously don't get to that because the story is told from Tom's point of view. I think that the leads have said at some point, like, yeah, we talked about doing it, which sounds horrible, doing a sequel to this movie where you see it from Summer's perspective and answer some of those questions, which, is valid because I think it would be interesting to see. It would maybe absolve her of some of her bigger crimes.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of like film writers or film directors and writers and whatnot going back and sort of pulling the curtain back. I've seen like Ridley Scott do that so many times, and it just makes his movies
Yeah, I don't know
worse
if we need to
over and over
retcon
again.
this thing.
True.
Yeah, like Blade Runner. Like how many edits of Blade Runner where every time he went back and trying to improve on it and like tell the story differently and like give you more information, it just took a little bit more away from it. And then the eventual like the settle of the debate and argument that Deckard actually was a replicant just kind of ruins the movie outright. So I'm not a big fan of that. But this is a movie where Summers, the character, has been so maligned and so, like we said before, villainized that it would be nice to have some sort of like resolution for her and some sort of like redemption, even though she doesn't need it. She's a strong, independent woman who doesn't need no redemption. But for so many people who misread this movie and demonized Summer and a whole generation of young men who watched that movie and probably saw her as like the villain of the piece and maybe shaped their perception of movies and had the opposite intended effect and kind of instilled in them the whole Tom syndrome. It would be nice to have that sort of clearing of the air for this movie and for the character of Summer.
As much as I hated this movie when I first saw it, it wasn't because I hated Summer. It was because I hated Tom.
Sure.
Because I was like, oh,
Yeah,
well,
sure.
like I made these same mistakes. Like, fuck this guy. Like
Right.
he deserves what he's getting. Talking about like how he barely grows in this movie, it reminds me of another film which I think it shares a lot of DNA with is including a Bell and Sebastian reference, and that is High Fidelity.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And
totally.
you can see
Yeah,
the
man.
influence, I think, of High Fidelity in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in both movies, they kind of use Bell and Sebastian as a way to like describe personalities. Like,
Yes.
in
Yeah.
High Fidelity, Jack Black blasts into the record store and is like, why are we listening to the sad bastard music? Oh, it's the new Bell and Sebastian. And then in this movie, it's like, oh, she's got good taste and she's quirky because she listens to Bell and Sebastian and she quoted
Yes.
them in her high school yearbook.
He's quirked up.
Yeah, or the Smiths. I love how this movie frames the Smiths as being like this obscure underground band that only cool people know about. It's like fucking everybody knows the Smiths.
Yeah.
Like there's two absolutes in the universe. Everybody knows what the Smiths are. Everybody loves the Smiths. Everybody knows and recognizes that Morrissey's a complete asshole. Like,
Universal truth. And maybe less so in 2009. I think maybe some of us were a little bit more hard on the sand about Morrissey being a total irredeemable asshole. But yes.
Like we knew he was
Sure.
an asshole,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah.
didn't know that he
Yeah.
was like
a misanthrope. Like me, you could maybe accept like,
Yeah.
oh, you're a cool, you're just misanthropic. No. Like,
yeah, you're just a crank.
horrible asshole.
Exactly.
But it's funny to me too because the two songs that they do choose to use in this movie, which are "There's a Light That Never Goes Out" and "Please Please Let Me Get What I Want," are both, the songs people know from
Yeah,
this.
these aren't deep cuts.
Right.
They're not deep
No.
cuts. They're not B-sides. What I think the most cringe moment in this movie for me personally is when he's sitting at his workstation and she's walking by and to sort of like lure her in, he decides to just turn up the volume on "Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want," which is just
I've done
I was
like stupid crap like that. I totally have that passive, just fearful way of trying to get a girl's attention until you just grow up and like literally grow a pair and just go up and talk to the girl. Ryan, I don't know if you've done the same thing, but I was such an introvert growing up, and like I was the one who like fell in love with every girl that talked to me because I was like this nerdy, quiet kid, and I would try and do stupid little schemes like that to like get their attention in class and shit. It's so fucking cringe.
and I don't think they ever
But
tell
yeah,
you how old they are in the movie, but you assume they're sort of early 20s. So it does feel very much like a high school. It's a little bit of a high school move, like, oh,
totally.
I dropped my
Yeah.
something. I have to ask, and not to get like too personal, but this is the Valentine's Day episode. Have either of you ever made a mixtape for someone?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, of course. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Of
Have you
course.
not?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course I have. But I don't know if people
Yeah.
still do that. Do people still like engage in the like mixtape?
As I sent you in my Spotify playlist that I made just for you.
Yeah, it's kind of It's funny. I'm my really good friend Brian Colburn. He's got a podcast called My Weekly Mixtape, wherein he sits down with a bunch of guests and musicians and all and like producers and whatnot, and he goes about like picking like a theme or like a chronological history of a particular band or something, and he actually goes and he crafts, and his guests go about crafting a
Yeah,
mixtape every week.
I've
It's
been on
pretty
that
awesome.
podcast.
But yeah, dude, Brian's the
You've
best.
been
I
on
love
this
that guy
podcast too.
so
I mean, the
much.
premise of a
Yeah.
mixtape then was very different, right? Because you actually did have
Oh yeah.
to very much hand select tracks. You had to find a way to transfer them onto physical media, give them to the person you were crushing on. It was a very different and much more loaded act, I feel. And
hmm
so
Oh yeah.
whether you are the giver or the receiver of the mixtape, there's always that kind of like moment of like, do they like me? Are they gonna like my music? If they don't like my music, they don't like me. And if you're getting one, you're like, well, shit, like I gotta say something.
Did you listen
about
to it
it.
yet? Did you listen to it yet?
It
Hey,
comes
have you
with
listened
a
to
little
it?
Right.
pressure, right?
It's like getting back to Michael Sarah, Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, where he makes that really super cringe mixtape CD for his girlfriend at the time, and they're on the outs. She's about to break up with him, and she doesn't even listen to it. And then what's her face actually ends up like collecting the CDs and listening to them, and thinking he has really good taste in music and is like really really good at like crafting these mixtapes. And then it's like a later reveal that like they were soulmates the whole time because like she loved his CDs and whatnot. It's so funny.
Yeah, and I think again, like this kind of aughts period of time, like there was a lot of identity caught up in the music that you were listening to because I think you had to earn it a little bit more, right? You had to
Sure.
find it, you
Yeah.
had to collect it, you had to curate it, and there was a different sort of ethos around that.
Yeah,
And there's
your
so-
mixtapes contained music you owned.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Sure.
you had to buy that
Yeah.
shit. There's a moment where they're in the record store and he's like holding up the Ringo Starr and they're talking about bands. He makes some offhand comment about like, I can't believe people don't know about so and so.
Spearmint,
Right. And
which is a great
she's
band.
like, who? And then he says to her, I put it on your mixtape. And you get the impression right then, or at least I did. This is what I caught. And like she doesn't listen to that goddamn mixtape. She's not listening to
No.
that shit.
No, she's just listening to her own music. Yeah.
Which he's not asking her about, honestly. Like not making like I think a concerted effort to be like, okay, well, what are you into?
Right. Again, he's projecting. He's trying to fit her into the mold of what he wants her to be, and she just rejects that at every turn. Yeah. Everybody listen to Spearmint, though. Spearmint's a good band.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because this movie was so successful that Mark Webb got the Spider-Man franchise afterwards.
Right. So many Spider-Man movies.
Yeah. Those are definitely two of the movies that have ever been made.
Well, I think this movie is also responsible for kicking off Zooey Deschanel's She and Him career. I
Yeah.
think it's responsible for spawning like just a whole era sort of like music, and the tone of this movie I think carried outside to culture for a while.
I mean, I think it was like it started with Garden State, and then it kind of hit Juno. Like you see it as well, I guess the Garden State was the Shins, but like that style of like indie music, like it went from like the Shins to Kimya Dawson and Juno, and then it moved over here to like Temper Trap and Regina
Yeah.
Spektor, and it's just like a mutation. Like when I watched this movie, I watched it on Hulu, and while I was watching it, Hulu said, "You know what you should watch next is Garden State."
I hate that movie.
See, that movie I really do. If you're comparing the two, right? I think this is far more successful in a lot of ways.
I agree.
Wow.
Yeah, this movie actually has something to say. I feel like Garden State is just a collection of pseudo hipster and indie ideas and visuals that don't really have a complete and cohesive
Yeah,
story
Garden
to
State is a
tell.
bunch of sketches that is like a fun ride. Totally.
Yeah, and I think Garden State does so much more of a disservice to the character of Sam than this movie does Summer, whether or not it's trying to villainize Summer or not. Sam in Garden State literally is just the living embodiment of the manic pixie girl like trope, and it's awful. And I feel so bad for Natalie Portman in that whole movie because she's literally just there to be a device for Zach Braff's character
Yeah, Summer
and
has a
his
lot more
quote unquote
agency
growth.
than Sam.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely. 2 movies where, you could fall in love on the basis of have something okay playing in your headphones, but I think in quality and in terms of how they treat their female characters, very different. And I prefer
Mhm.
500 Days of Summer.
Yeah, and I remember like
Definitely. Yeah.
visually, like it's a very interesting movie. Like when you go to that party and they do the split screen with his expectations versus
Yeah.
what actually happens. Like I remember being like, oh, like that's a really cool way to do that.
Yeah, it's very music video, but it works in the sense that the whole movie is so framed with music anyway, which is why we're talking about it here today. But yeah, like Mark Webb's sensibilities as a kinetic filmmaker are fully on display in that sequence, and it's probably my favorite sequence of the movie, honestly.
It's the one that I think has the most emotional gravity to it. It's the most emotionally gut punching because I think up until that moment, it's kind of a will they, won't they get back together, and it maintains a pretty light tone. But once he gets invited to that party and he finds out that she is engaged and it is not happening, it is pretty devastating. It's probably the only time in the film where I sympathize with Tom.
Sure. Yeah, he gets blindsided for sure.
You should have maybe told him, like maybe a little. That's my one thing, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
that is a little suspect. They told him.
Yeah.
Could have not invited him at all.
Yeah. My Summer told me that she was in a relationship with another guy during my lunch break at work.
Oh, I'm sorry,
break?
dude.
Yeah, lunch break.
Oh no! So you're like having some Chipotle at the
Yeah.
Apple Store counter.
Yeah, I'm at the mall. I'm working at the mall.
Brutal.
Sucks.
Ugh.
Nothing worse than receiving bad news at the mall.
Probably had some like
Or
Rocky
at work. Yeah.
Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory stuff to make myself feel better afterwards.
I feel like it's fun to burn that
Get
big
your
Yeah, my
feelings. Totally.
feelings, just like, what is your most decadent caramel apple?
That's great.
And then dip it twice.
Yeah, we keep rolling it.
Yeah, just put
Yeah.
more Oreos on it, please. I'm going through something.
I'll let you know when to stop. It's a 20-pound caramel apple.
Did you respond by doing drunk karaoke to Train in Vain? Was that your
on a date with another girl that looks nothing like your
Right.
Summer?
No.
telling you the truth for once? But
My karaoke choices are always like, what's the most melodramatic song I can find? It's like The Reason by Hoobastank, things like that.
Oh shit. Nice.
it's so
It's wonderful.
good.
I love it.
I have to say there's some very, like, obviously, because both of them are singers or at least like competent vocally. Like, there's some
Don't get me
pretty
started
good-
on JGL.
Really? Are you mad at it? You don't think he's a competent vocalist?
We talked about this. I do not enjoy him thinking that he's a musician.
Well, musician
fair.
is strong.
He tried to do like a whole thing about it with that hit record thing that he was doing. Like, just trying to like cover like lithium and make people pay to watch him do that. Like,
And nobody should
no.
pay to see him sing. I'm saying if I saw him at karaoke, I'd be like, not bad.
Yeah, karaoke, sure. I'm sure he's a good hang.
Even Summer is like, yeah, it's not bad. Like, it's not like, wow, you're wildly talented. It's not bad.
It was like, yeah, I'm in She and Him and you are not him.
Oh, not him. Fern.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
enjoyed her singing up until this point. Like, I liked her an awful lot. And I was like, why doesn't
She's
she get
awesome in
like
Elf.
bigger roles? She's so great. And then she started she and him, and I was like, get her out of here.
Yeah, and then she was everywhere. And her being everywhere, I feel it. I don't really believe in like whatever Illuminati type shit about Hollywood, but you have to believe that there's some kind of unholy trifecta of like IKEA, Amtrak, and like the Bangs lobby that all conspired in the year 2009 to make those things like romantic in this movie. Because that shit with the IKEA scene, I swear to God, like made people think that IKEA was a good place to have a date.
Oh, it totally is not. But I'll tell
Totally
you
not.
what, here's a really weird thing. I did the funny goofing off playing house and IKEA thing before this movie came out with the girl I was trying to get over when I first saw this movie. So that was just a turn on the freaking waterworks moment for me sitting in the theater. It was the weirdest thing. I was like, "What the hell?"
My wife.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
That's terrible.
It was super weird. It was super weird. Yeah. Now I hate IKEA, but their cinnamon rolls are still delicious.
I like their cafe.
Hmm.
They should have gone there. Yeah, they really do like
Yeah.
they're very close to like getting to third base at the IKEA. I'm kind of like who
If not
are
for
the
that,
workers in this IKEA and where's the HR at this greeting card company?
right? Oh, the greeting card company is such a weird device for this movie too. It's another one of those things that's a little bit too on the
Yeah.
nose. Like Tom, who's like lost in his feelings and in like this sort of like self-imposed prison of like trying to find the one and making himself miserable until he finds her. And at the same time, he's ironically writing like these really happy and sappy greeting card messages.
But it comes back a few.
It's very, very screenwriter 101
It's
type
pretty
of stuff. Like it's very.
But it comes, but it
Yeah.
happens again a few years later in Her. That's what Joaquin Phoenix's job is in Her.
It's true.
Like everyone in Hollywood was like, I don't know, he's sad. Let's make him a greeting card.
Going out a
writer."
greeting card company. It has definitely happened in other like film and TV shows. I think it's kind of like working in advertising. Just a good setup.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. All right, here's a question for you guys. The end of the movie, when Tom is sitting at a park bench where they had their talk about like his passions, his love for the city of LA, how he would like improve it with his skills as an architect. At the end of the movie, he's sitting on that park bench and he's feeling bad about himself. And all of a sudden, Summer appears behind him and yells out to him. And then they sit down and they have like this catharsis like conversation. Was that all in his head, or was she actually there?
Oh, in his head.
I think it's all in his head.
I've never thought about that. So what makes you think it's all in his head?
The weird, first of all, just the coincidence that he goes there and she's just like standing behind a tree until it's time for her to like reveal herself, and the pointedness and the a little bit too overly cathartic end of the conversation where she gets up and turns around and looks at him one last time, and that's when he goes and he meets the next girl of his dreams and so forth. It feels like he was having that conversation in his head and still trying to process and still trying to put away those feelings and still deluding himself as a result of that instead.
Yeah, I don't think he had the maturity to have that actual conversation with her in person.
No. Mm-mm. No, I agree. Yeah, it was him trying to process and trying to create his own closure, because that's kind of the crappy thing is like he'll never have closure, and that's probably a lot of the reason why he just jumps right into presumably the next relationship with Autumn and keeps continuing this cycle over and over. But yeah, it's tragic. Honestly, it's sad for him, but he's also kind of a dick. So,
Well, it's funny because Nicole texted me earlier today about how the screenwriter sent the screenplay to his ex-girlfriend at one point. And that is such a like, I don't know. It's like crossing the line.
Is that a dick move, or is that like
Well, I mean, I think to do this at all, right, is to do it in this way where it's apparently so lifted from life is kind of a violation in a way. Like I feel like if I were on the receiving end of that, I would probably feel kind of violated, because then at that point, what are you gonna do, right? Well, okay, you've written this like screed like against me, I guess. It's odd, right? It's an odd way to work out your heartbreak.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, what did the screenwriter learn then? I hope like he took a lesson from this. But
what happened to the adage of like you write a letter write out your
Right. I was
feelings,
just
and
gonna
then you
say the
tear
same
it up
thing.
and you throw it away.
Or you burn it, or you said it's like your own sort of form of
Yeah.
catharsis. You don't write a 190-page letter and
Right,
then
you don't
mail
write a
it to her.
whole
That's
ass screenplay and like a vehicle for Zooey Deschanel's entire career. That's not what you do. You just
Or you start a shitty
No.
emo band.
you
Yeah,
place that
exactly.
music and you send it to the dead letter office. I have so many dead letters that I've never sent to people. It's like a hobby at this point.
That's awesome.
Because it's what you do, you like get it out of your system and then you file it away. And it's out and it's
Yeah.
done. No mess, no fuss.
Yeah. I agree.
Or you could make millions of
Just
dollars,
having
I don't know,
those-
in Hollywood, I guess.
Sure, yeah, you launch Zoe Deschanel's career and you make Joseph Gordon-Levitt an A-lister, all as a way of getting back at your ex-girlfriend. I guess that works too.
I mean, I was fine with him becoming an A-lister. I was excited for him. I just didn't want him to like start a music career.
He was nominated
Yeah,
for a
that's
Golden
fair.
Globe for this performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think
think
the
the movie
acting
was
is
nominated
pretty
for Best
strong in
Comedy
this
too, wasn't it?
movie.
Yeah.
Chloe Grace Moretz, she is fantastic in this movie.
She's awesome.
And like her role is like a really annoying trope that's in a lot of movies. You know, the little kid who like is like way wise beyond their years.
Right.
Usually like that is like such an eye roll of a character.
Right.
But like she's just so good in it. We're like, yeah, okay. So you give him a bottle of vodka. Like that's funny.
It was funny. She manages to make it not annoying. You're 100% right.
Yeah, Hit Girl in Kick-Ass
Yeah.
could have been a really cringy role too, and she's just a great actress. She just nails it, makes it believable, makes you like invest in it.
Like great
awesome.
presence. The thing that is bad for me in this movie, again, to get back to the music, is how many Joy Division shirts does one person need to wear in one movie? I counted them. There's a flashback scene where he's wearing a Joy Division shirt, so that's one. He's seen in 2 different scenes with an Unknown Pleasure shirt. And then there's like a bonus Joy Division shirt thrown in somewhere. That's so many shirts.
And he's wearing one at one point with a blazer over it, and it's
Cute.
like just the like
Cute.
it's like the pinnacle of pretentiousness.
Can we just talk? I know this is not a podcast about fashion or fashion trends, but can we talk for a second about, like, I have so many notes about his goddamn cardigan, the sweater vest, the ties that don't reach the belt. Oh my God, I was going insane. I'm like, was this a thing? Did people dress like this? But then I kind of remembered, like, yeah, they did. Like, I knew a lot of dudes that like looked like this and had that man bag.
Yes, the man bag, the cardigans. I remember like being I would get really upset when I would see a guy in an Argyle sweater.
Well, because it was also, that was like a thing.
And I was like, just stop it. Like, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Stop that. Like a Ben Sherman Argyle sweater.
Yeah, like you're not gonna go from Steve Urkel to Stefan Urkel.
No, Argyle is
That's
that
an awesome
powerful.
reference.
No.
Yeah, but I was just like looking at him like, why he always got that shit on? And it didn't matter where they were going. Oh,
Right.
that shit
Yeah.
on.
He's always dressed like business casual, even if like going to the movies or like going to have like pancakes at a diner or something. It's like, bro,
What are you
relax.
doing? And there's one
man.
scene where like they're both wearing a tie with a sweater vest. I think it's the scene where they're screaming penis in the park. And she's got one too. And I'm like, what the fuck? This costume designer had like just an unlimited vest budget. Vest and
definitely not the costume designer from Can't Hardly Wait.
No.
Because that person knew how to sell shit.
Yeah. Another great movie, man.
But yeah, speaking of the Joy Division shirts, one of the most random movies that I saw a Joy Division shirt in was Ready Player One.
Oh, really?
I get that though. That movie is so referential.
It was just, but the girl, I forget her name. When she Artemis, when he meets her for the first time, she's wearing like this like Joy Division like cut off T-shirt, and I'm like, yeah, in the dystopia, like we're still gonna find Joy Division shirts to show that we're cool.
Well, I'm kind of wondering now too, because I feel like now you look at a Joy Division Unknown Pleasure shirt, and it's a stand-in for this character is pretentious, but I think in the case of Tom, it was a stand-in for this is just meaningful to him. And at some point, like that shirt jumped the shark, and I don't really know when.
when they started selling it at like
Right around the time
H&M.
this movie came out.
This movie was sharp.
Honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's talk about the music a little bit, because it's an interesting thing, this soundtrack, because it's all music I love, but it's all a little bit pretentious, which kind of fits in perfectly with the story they're telling, with the characters they're being portrayed here. It starts off with Regina Spektor, Us, which is off Soviet Kitsch, which is still one of my favorite albums of that era. I think she's a wonderful musician, but she's very, very quirky and very experimental in her music and very offbeat. And it sets the tone for, okay, this is going to be some silliness. We're going to get some quirkiness. It's going to be the manic pixie dream girl. It's going to be the pretentious dude who's, is deluding himself with all these weird feelings of like romance and whatnot. And I think that, again, if we're getting the back to the point of whether or not this movie is self-aware or not, the soundtrack, it's hard to tell if the soundtrack, as its inclusion in this movie, is self-aware or if it's just playing to the themes. Because looking at this movie now, it does feel largely pretentious in an endearing way. Like the pretension is on display almost as a feature and not a bug.
Mhm.
Like the Smiths, I love the Smiths. It's pretentious. The Pixies fucking rule. They're still a little pretentious. Like Frank Black is a very pretentious dude. Like you mentioned the Temper Trap before with what's the song? Sweet Disposition. That song almost became synonymous with like pretentious girls in film school when this movie came
Hate
out.
that song.
So yeah, how do you guys feel about that? Like that, like what's your takeaway from like the soundtrack of this movie as almost like a character in
Yeah,
the movie?
it's a great snapshot of 2009. Like a lot of the bands I haven't really thought about since this movie. I was like, oh, Doves. Not that I don't like Doves, but I was like, oh, I haven't really
Yeah.
thought about Doves in a long time. Regina Spektor, she's great. I feel like she got kind of lumped in with like being like kind of like a folky, kind of quirky
Yeah.
songwriter. Though I feel like she has a little bit more range. I don't think she's given enough credit for that. I think she's kind of like a bridge between like kind of the more folky people and like the more kind of lush like Sufjan Stevens sort of music
Yeah.
that came a little bit around this
Yeah.
time. I feel like she's a good bridge for that. I think she gets kind of thrown in with like like Kimya Dawson and Moldy Peaches and stuff.
Mhm.
So it was fun to revisit like, oh yeah, like I don't think I've thought about all these bands for like the last 10 years or so. Some of it I
Sure.
want to
Yeah.
revisit, some of it maybe I don't. Sweet Disposition being one of those songs. I was like, wait, is this a cover?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
song was everywhere. It's like that Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zero song.
Rides Like Home. Yeah, totally. I think a lot of these songs were pretty omnipresent around this period of time. I think what's interesting is that they do seem to use songs by bands that are famously broken up on bad terms.
Sure.
There's the Simon and Garfunkel, there's the Smiths, there's Pixies, who at that time were still broken up on bad terms. So there's
Mhm.
kind of an interesting dynamic there. And it is explicitly about the idea that music is part of your self-identity. And Tom takes that very seriously. And the first time you see him, when his backstory is being explained by the narrator, he's a boy wearing his Joy Division shirt behind like a
Right.
wall of vinyl, right? Of all of these aforementioned bands. I don't know, by the way, I don't know that he would have been able to cop all that vinyl in like the 90s. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, no, bitch, you would have owned those on CD. Really?
Yeah.
That really? Anyway,
Yeah.
He just
I
stole it from High Fidelity, just went there, sat and just took all the shit.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it's plausible, but it's a little implausible. But yeah, it's definitely it's that mixed with things that were very, I think, hip at the time. Because like Wolf
Mhm.
Mother, the Black Lips, like these were bands that had like a little blip, like a little moment. Mushaboom by Feist being in this,
Yeah,
Yeah.
why
or
that song out of
2009.
any other Feist song?
Yeah. I
I
don't
feel
know,
like
man.
that is the most like Zoe Deschanel in the Feist catalog.
That
Yeah.
song really bugs me. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Feist, but that song is too twee for me.
I like the Postal Service
Yeah.
remix of it.
That's true. That was good.
I like
Yeah.
that the Infinite Pet by Spoon is part of this mix.
Spoon's a great band.
I
They're
mean,
timeless. They're wonderful.
Give
sure.
Britt
Yeah.
Daniel that money.
Get Britt Daniel his bag. Garden State doesn't have
Yeah.
Spoon.
Nope. Hmm. Yeah, this film's got a killer soundtrack. It's really good. It's right up there with actually Garden State. Garden State has a phenomenal soundtrack too, but it's largely made up of, like you said, songs and bands that were just really popular and hip at the time, and they kind of convalesced and shit. I think they won a Grammy for that soundtrack, which was the best part of the whole movie.
It kind of like
You
drives
know?
the movie, I feel. Like I think the soundtrack in
Yeah.
that case is probably greater than the movie and the storytelling itself. And that I think you could make
Totally.
that argument.
Yeah,
pretty
it does a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, like without it, what do you have? You know? I think also you could probably, and I was talking to Ryan about this, I feel like you can draw kind of a direct line between aspects of this movie and La La Land, for better and for worse. There's,
Oh,
there's that
definitely.
whole
Yeah.
like very LA sort of like dance sequence to Hall & Oates, You Make My Dreams Come True, where Tom is like by a fountain and everyone's dressed in blue and there's like animated birds. And, there's something also very like celebratory of LA about this movie that I think people like, especially if you're like from here. It's kind of cool. You're like,
Sure.
oh, cool, it's the Bradbury building,
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
feel like the characters kind of have similar arcs where like he doesn't really grow, but she tends to figure stuff out at the end.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
And you can look in for our friend who loves La La Land and is very mad that I don't like La La Land.
You don't like La La Land?
here we go.
Really?
Here we go.
Oh
Yeah,
man, that last scene is brutal.
that's not why I don't like it though. I
Yeah.
think it just gets really lazy in the middle.
That's fair. Yeah, I understand where you're
But
coming
we
from
have
there.
a friend, our friend loves this movie and loves La La Land, and like it's a movie about not selling out. And I was like, what are you talking about?
But this is proof, right? That movies are always like a Rorschach test. And sometimes maybe it's more about like what you are putting into it energetically.
Yeah,
and
it's
how
like I think you're projecting your
100%.
shit onto
Yeah,
that
like I
movie.
think you got your shit too mixed up in this, but really, I think this is a perfect movie for that. Like, especially if you were a young person at the time, like you're definitely going to see aspects of yourself in these people.
Yeah. I mean, getting back to Scott Pilgrim, which is what led us to decide to record this episode as well. It's like Scott Pilgrim, 500 Days of Summer, and the trifecta for me in this whole era of films and me getting over that bad breakup was Forgetting Sarah Marshall,
Yeah.
where we've got yet another like main character who's going through this terrible breakup, and the woman he was with like rebounded immediately, is in another relationship, and he's left to kind of flounder, and he's just feeling bad for himself and being miserable. And he has to come to terms with the fact that he also contributed to this relationship ending. And as a result, he has to grow and become a better person and a stronger person in order to make himself available for the next thing that comes along, who happens to be Mila Kunis. And those were the three movies that I kept going back to over and over again in that time frame. And all three of those movies have killer soundtracks too.
Forgetting Sarah Marshall's another fuck you of a screenplay to an ex-girlfriend.
100%. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, but it's not quite as vindictive. And Jason Segel said as much. Like, it's very much autobiographical for a relationship he went through. And he even said, like, down to the point where, like, she broke up with him while he was standing in their apartment naked.
Right.
And he said at that point, he said he was heartbroken, but then he just started laughing at the ridiculousness of the situation where he was just standing there naked, and all of a sudden she just dumped him. But I mean, he approached writing the screenplay as both a means of catharsis and also taking his life experiences and making something funny and entertaining and poignant out of it. But it never felt like he was writing like a deliberate fuck you. It was a clearing of the air for him. It was a moving on. It was a cathartic thing for him to do. But it didn't feel mean spirited, like writing the screenplay and sending it to the woman who broke up with him. Like, I can't believe that guy did that. That's effed.
And also I think like it's not so much of like a post-mortem dissection that like this movie feels like violent in its dissection of everything that went wrong and every way that she wronged him. Whereas Forgetting Sarah Marshall is not only a comedy, but also like I feel like is kind of forgiving. It's just sort of played as like, yeah, this is what happened.
Yeah.
So there isn't quite as much of that blame game that happens that you get in this film where Tom really does blame Summer for every wrong turn and turns none of that introspection, none of that on himself, really,
Yeah.
until the end.
Well, yeah, and that's why I go back to that scene at the park bench at the end of the movie where I don't believe she's actually there, because she has that one line where she's talking about how she met her future husband sitting in a cafe reading Dorian Gray. And she says that she realized what she was never sure of with Tom. And she says it in such a pointed way that it feels like him just prodding himself over and over again. It doesn't feel like a line that character, Summer, would have delivered in that way. It was such a sharp and painful and pointed and mean line. And all of a sudden they both just sort of brush it off and start talking about something else entirely. It feels like Tom was just refusing to stop putting his mental hand in the fire, so to speak, and to just let those feelings go.
Yeah, I don't think he
So
really does the work in this movie.
he doesn't. But the movie fools you into thinking he's doing the work, because he's like bouncing the tennis ball to Wolf Mother, and he clears off his back wall, and he starts drawing again, and he starts, going after architectural jobs and whatnot. But it's just him not doing the work, but going through the motions of moving on from the breakup, but not like emotionally. And that's why I feel like he's just going to latch on to Autumn and go through the whole cycle all over again, because it's not even about the women. It's about his own maybe self-imposed and self-inflicted trauma. It's not even about the women he's in his relationships with him. It's him. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Yeah, I've not because of this movie, but I think around this time is where like I took a break to kind of just work on myself and to
Yeah.
try to feel better just about being present, about being me.
Yeah.
It's that it is something that I feel like everyone goes through in their 20s, but people don't tell you that you're going to go through that in your 20s. We watch
Yeah, man.
MTV and it's like, oh, spring break and let's go on road rules. But it's like, oh no, like your life is going to suck because you're figuring shit out on how to survive by yourself. Like I have a
Yeah.
friend that is like 5 years older than me, and I remember like having lunch with him and being like, "Oh man, like why does everything suck right now? Like I'm in my 20s. This is supposed to be the best time of my life." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "I feel like things get better once you hit 30."
100%. Yeah.
But I was like, "No,
Yeah, you're still a kid in your
yeah,
20s. You're not only still trying to figure things out, but you're also trying to figure it out on your own for the first time in most
Yeah.
cases. Typically you go to college, and after you leave college, you're out on your own, and like you either got roommates or something, but you're more or less left to your own devices, and that's when you really have to start figuring out who you are, how you function as an adult, and trying to make the right choices to set yourself up for a healthy 30s. But being completely fucked up is part of your 20s, and it
Yeah.
sucks. It's like an extended adolescence, honestly, because you're through your adolescence, but you haven't learned anything yet. And having to be on your own for the first time and having to learn all those life lessons, and essentially go through it yourself, by yourself, and hopefully come through it healthier and stronger and more ready to be an adult on the other side. That's a rough
Yeah.
thing. I hated my 20s. I loved my 30s because I had figured a lot of stuff out. I was more secure. I was comfortable in my skin. I was making a little bit more money, which is awesome. And I was just having an all around better time. Your 20s are supposed to be awful, I think. They're just supposed to be. There's a lot of good there, too, like independence and freedom for the first time, and that room to grow and figure yourself out. But self discovery is a pain in the
Yeah.
ass. It's never
It's a painful
easy.
process, and I think a lot of the behavior in this film reminds you of a time when your frontal lobe was definitely not fully formed, and, you were
Yeah.
probably, like, too
Yeah.
careless with I know I was. I feel like this is very confessional now, but, like, you're very careless sometimes with people's feelings and emotions, and you have to learn from that, and you get hurt, and you sometimes do some of the hurting, I think, in your early 20s when
Yeah.
you're, trying to figure out what is acceptable and what isn't. And when everything is
Yeah.
kind of revolving around, like in this movie, a drunk night out at karaoke, right? Like every situation is kind of ripe for somebody getting kicked in the heart.
Mhm. Yeah. And I'm not innocent. I've been this summer in relationships where, I set the boundaries initially where I was only looking for something casual, wasn't looking to get super serious, and just allowed myself to get attached to somebody. And then having to realize that it wasn't the best or healthiest relationship and having to be the one to cut it off and break it off. It's a tough thing. And it's people don't realize that a lot of the times it's harder to be the person that has to do the breaking up as opposed to being the person that's being dumped. Like that can be way harder sometimes. And I've been this summer in somebody else's story, and it's shitty to think about, but it's life, like there are no good guys or bad guys. It's circumstances. It's, you know, only one relationship theoretically is ever going to be that perfect relationship, right? Like, and if you don't find it, that's okay. But if you do, like, it's all a numbers game, and everybody's going to go through a bunch of terrible breakups, and you're going to be on the receiving end, and you're going to be the one dealing it out
Yeah,
sometimes. Like,
absolutely.
that's just how it
Yeah, and I
goes.
think that quest for finding the one is like it's an impossible task. And I feel like,
Yeah.
especially in your 20s, where like your idea of the one is like not realistic at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this movie is so relatable and why it can be painful for people, because it's like, oh, I was that asshole once in my
Yeah.
life, or I was that asshole just a couple years prior to this movie coming out. And it sucks, but that's what happens when you gain more life experience. I think Taylor Tomlinson, the comedian, says it like this. She goes, you know why you're skinny in your 20s? Because you don't have a gut you can trust yet.
That's a good ass line.
I love it. Yeah,
Great.
that's fantastic.
I mean, on the topic of this quest for the one and on Valentine's Day, do you think, taking a poll, do you think a similar taste in music is a good foundation for a relationship?
I'll go first. I don't think it hurts. I think having similar tastes in some things and having common ground to begin the basis of a relationship is a good thing. Um, you shouldn't obviously define your relationship by having the same taste in music. And I'm somebody who likes to constantly rediscover or discover new music all the time and find new bands and sharing those bands. And I would like for, the other person that I'm in a relationship with to do the same thing and always bring to the table something new for us to listen to together. Um, but my musical tastes are so weird and varied, and I'm listening to something wildly different from day to day. Like if you looked at my list of concerts I'm going to this year, they're weird. Like I'm gonna go to actually in like a week, I'm gonna go see Death from Above 1979, which is like a bass player and a drummer, and they're doing the 20th anniversary of my favorite album they did. They're doing that in like a 500-person venue, and it's gonna be
Fun.
phenomenal. Right after that, I'm gonna go see JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown, who are two experimental hip hop artists, and Prof. And it's gonna be on like April 22nd. There's gonna be like a cloud of smoke above the venue. It's gonna be fantastic.
Danny Brown sober.
And then yeah, I know, yeah, which is great for him. It's amazing. But like Danny Brown's fantastic. JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown put an album out in, I think it was last year, maybe 2023. And it was my favorite album of the year. And it's one of the weirdest, most experimental, most badass hip hop albums I've ever heard.
That's good.
Yeah, JPEG Mafia is just this incredible, fearless producer, and he'll sample everything from like NSYNC to sound effects from like Super Nintendo commercials from like the 90s and stuff. He's just wild. And I can't wait to see that. And then a couple of weeks after that, I'm going to see Jack White.
Nice.
So
That's a good lineup.
Yeah, I know. I'm
Ew.
super, super excited. Yeah. But yeah, I listen to everything and anything, which sounds cliche and pretentious to say, but I really just do listen to everything. And whatever the other person I'm with listens to, I'm going to find some common ground there. I'm going to find something to pick out. I like Taylor Swift. I think she's great. I absolutely freaking love Billie Eilish and Sabrina Carpenter. I think we're in one of the best eras of pop music ever,
Yeah,
honestly.
I'll buy that.
So, yeah. So I'll buy into just about anything. So, yeah, I almost feel like it would be boring to be in a relationship where your tastes in movies and music and whatnot are exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, having things in common is always a good thing in relationships. I don't think it has to be like my top 5 favorite bands have to match your top 5 favorite bands, and if not, this is not going to work out. Like, I don't think it has to be that exact. but I think having appreciation for music and listening to music that you may not be familiar with and checking stuff out, like I think that is important. But it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be like, oh, like, well, you like this band and I don't, so I don't know if we can date. Like, I don't think that it has to be that close, but
That's good. So I think you're
Yeah,
just not
yeah.
music snobs necessarily, which is good. I think there's probably a certain brand of person that was like, "No, I can't do that." It might be me a little bit.
All right, so what's your take on that question
Yeah, I
yourself?
mean, I think it's a good way to start a conversation with someone, which you kind of see play out in the movie, right? They're in the elevator, he's listening to this song. What a great icebreaker, right? Fantastic icebreaker. Gives you something to do if you want to go to a show, gives you something to talk about if you're in the car. I think it's a great way to bond or to test, like the things that you like and to get to know each other a little better, but it has to be mutual, right? Like, you have to stay open-minded
Yeah.
to their shit, and they have to stay open-minded to your shit. And if they listen to, Christian rock or new country music, then you can kick them out of the car.
Some
That's
new
just me.
country's okay. Jelly Roll's
I
pretty
I know
dope.
where we're
Like,
going with that.
yeah. I will take Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings,
Oh,
Dolly
new
Parton,
country
all that old
music.
the classic
New, not
country.
old.
Yeah. Oh, I know. That's what I'm saying. I'll take the classic over the new stuff any
Yeah,
day. But there's some diamonds in the rough to
for
be
sure.
gleaned and pulled from
No
new country.
genre is bad, I think, or off limits or
Yeah.
should be considered off limits, but there are definitely, I've probably definitely ruled people out of my dating pool on the basis of their tastes in certain things, which sounds really mean, but it's true. I'm
No,
sorry.
we all have our oh no nos. So
Yeah, you
yeah,
don't have to date anyone just because they want to date you.
That's the
exactly.
most similar I am to Tom, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
That and the skinny ties in my closet.
Yes, you,
Oh, you
you
have a
wear
collection
too
of skinny
many
ties and
ties.
argyle
Yeah,
sweaters. Yeah.
it's my love for
Every
skinny ties.
time I see you, you're always wearing a skinny tie.
Yep, sometimes with just add just random knit over it.
Just to like go out and get donuts or something. Yeah.
Right. Just clean my house.
Right. Yeah. You got to put your tie on in your sweater vest to clean the house. Yeah.
So this is our Valentine's Day episode. I want to end things with a really funny story about kind of a date, not really a date. So this happened after I got married. So I was working at the school, and I'm having lunch with like my team, and there is this one teacher who, like, I think I had caught her like staring at me a couple times, like while I was like walking around campus. And so this teacher is texting my coworker, is also female. And I was like, "Oh, let's get drinks tonight." And then she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm having lunch with my team." And she goes, "Oh, is Ryan there?"
Hey.
Yeah, and she's like, yeah, Ryan's here because he's on my team. We're all having lunch." And she goes, "Oh, invite him out for drinks too." And my coworker is like relaying this conversation like to the whole team. I go, "Well, I guess I'm free. I'll have to talk to my wife about it." But I go, she knows I'm married, right?" And so my coworker texts like, "Do you know that Ryan is married?" And her comment was, "I've seen the ring."
What?
And so yeah, so she's like, it was, see if Ryan will come out. And so so I talked to my wife about it. I go, "There's this teacher who wants me to come out and have drinks." And I swear, like, every time I've talked to this girl, she's said like two word, like, she gives me like super short answers, like very shy. Like I'm very shocked that she is all of a sudden talking a big game about, like, we invite
Yeah.
Ryan out for drinks. I don't care that he's married. Like, let's see what happens. And so my wife knows I'm going to drink, going to get drinks with this girl. Not just her, right? Like, it's a group of us, right? It'd be weird if it was just me and her. And so I get there, and like she is just like, first it's like, oh hey, hi, and then after that, like totally like barely talks to me. And I just feel like it is such a like dating is such a shit show where like you have this person who is like openly like confessed interest, and then like I show up and it's just like I don't even know why I'm here.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna drink my frame on the rocks and then take an Uber home.
Was she into you because of that Powerline hat? Because I'm not gonna lie, I jumped onto this chat and I saw that hat. I swooned a little bit too, man.
A sweet hat collection.
It's a dope hat,
Soundtrack
man.
podcast.
Were you playing the
Yeah.
Smiths at your desk? Is that what it was? You should have done
Oh,
that.
yeah.
When you keep that at like low volume so you don't attract the honeys.
I don't know. It was a strange situation.
Brian's like, it was a weird time in my life.
And I think she had a boyfriend, so I was even more confused. And I was like, man, you're a really
Damn.
bad girlfriend. You're such a summer
Yeah.
Finn.
Yeah, none of that sounds great.
No.
And I was like, I'm married. My wife knows I'm here. Or does your boyfriend?
I like the
know
line
you're here?
though. I've seen the ring. Like,
Yeah, I
damn.
was like, that's a really strong move.
It's aggressive.
But then, like you said, like you showed up and she didn't say or do anything.
Yeah, like she said hi. I think maybe like it was a couple like asked a couple questions, but like she was like doing her own thing, talking to like some other guy, and I don't know, who knows. Whatever it was, it didn't work. Clearly, it didn't work.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I don't even know what you would call that move, that series of moves she was trying to pull off.
Because
No.
I was just like, all right. So this went exactly how it would have gone if I had never known any of that information.
Yeah, dude, without the context, that middle context, like you showing up for those drinks, you would have never known that anything was happening. You would never like led on to the fact that like she was into you and like trying to mess up both of your lives.
Yeah.
That's wild, dude, man.
And whenever whenever I do like what ifs with like what if I had never met my wife or things like that, I just think of that story and go, oh, I'm so glad that I'm married.
It's a mess out here, dude. Don't ever be not married. It sucks out here, dude. I'm not
Happy
gonna
Valentine's Day.
lie. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, DT, for coming back. We love having you on the
Yeah, man.
podcast. Thank you for pouring out your emotions into our ears.
Yes.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I was so jazzed when you guys invited me back after we did the Scott Pilgrim episode because that one was a blast too. I'll be on the show as many times as you guys will have me. This was wonderful.
So nice.
Yeah, I mean, you are one of our favorite guests, and
Thanks, man.
we have a pretty good guest list.
No, yeah, your guys' show is killer. It's always awesome.
Well, the guest list is killer. The competition is strong on the guest list, just to be clear.
Fair, yeah.
So if people want to check out Space Castle, how can they find you?
Yeah, spacecastle.net is probably the easiest place. Or if you want to get right to the meat and potatoes, youtube.com/@Space Castle Show.
Very cool. And then you are also on the Blue Sky.
I'm on the Blue Sky. I got rid of the Twitter once and for all. I deleted it outright.
No.
Never going
Same.
back. So it's easy to find me on the Blue Sky. You can find me on Threads and Instagram. I'm a little bit on the fence on those right now at the moment too. We'll see what happens. I may just stick to the Blue Sky. It's been lovely. It's kind of like what social media used to be back in the day, without all the horrible, awful, terrible crap. But there is some terrible, awful, horrible crap there anyway, but they have a really good filter system. So yeah. But yeah, come check me out. I'd love for you guys and anybody else who might be listening to come hang out with me. I do videos like every once in a while. I try and do it every 2 weeks. And I do some filler content in between because I just like making videos. But it's mostly like nerdy, like 80s, 90s, and 2000s nostalgia videos with some zany like B stories and weird things happening. It's a marriage of my love of film and video editing and graphic design and music and cartoons and stand-up comedy and just all kinds of stupid crap that I don't have an outlet for otherwise. So yeah, I love doing it. And the people who have been like commenting on videos and hanging out in the Discord have been just wonderful. So it's been a really great experience.
Very cool. Check that out. And of course, we are still on Twitter. I'm also on Blue Sky and Soundtrack Cast. I am only on Twitter because like I still have some podcast friends that haven't made the jump. So it's like, well, that's the only way to keep in touch with those guys.
Yeah.
But, you know, soundtrackcast.bluesky.social, soundtrackcast on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, the Patreon at patreon.com/soundtrackyourlife, where you get multiple bonus episodes a year where I think we're going to talk about Chalamet as Bob Dylan soon.
Nice.
But once again, happy Valentine's Day.
With love.
Don't be a Tom from 500 Days of Summer.
No, don't do that.